Good morning. Today is the 24th day of Teves, the 5th of January. 24th of Tevet is the Yortzeit, the day of passing of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad, the spiritual grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. And just a couple words about him. When he joined the school of the Maggid of Mezrich, the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, there was a feeling that the way of Chassidus, the way that the Baal Shem Tov had taught, was already gone, because to know how the Baal Shem Tov, to connect to the path that the Baal Shem Tov had shown, you actually had to be with him. And he was already not in the world for a while. And what the Alter Rebbe did was he created a intellectual exercise or corpus of exercises and knowledge that would allow someone who didn't know the Baal Shem Tov to understand how he thought and how he functioned. And that was his greatest endeavor during his life, to recreate the way of the Baal Shem Tov in a way that every person could learn how to get there. And that is basically what started the part of Chassidus called Chabad. And it's not by mistake that the Lubavitch Rebbe, the last Rebbe, he took it upon himself to ensure that every single Jew would be connected to Torah. And in his later years, he wanted to usher in the redemption and to change the entire world. Why is it not a mistake? I mean, you might think that Chabad should have been more intellectual. There still are some intellects in Chabad, but intellectuals in Chabad, but mostly people are dedicated to others, because that really was the path of the Baal Shem Tov. The real essence of the path was how to do kindness to others. That's why they called it Chassidut in the end. Chassidut literally means acts of kindness. And so this was what the Lubavitcher Rebbe took was the essence of the Baal Shem Tov's path that the Alter Rebbe had been able to phrase in words and in teachings, and something that everybody could connect to. In any case, this also connects to our reading today, the sixth reading of Shemot. And in the sixth reading, we encounter a very strange story. That Moses is now taking his wife and two children down to Egypt. He's not yet met Aaron. Aaron's going to convince him to send his wife and two children back to Midian. But at the moment, Moses thinks that he's coming with his family. He takes them down. And on the way, they stop in an inn, and there's a very strange event. I think it's one of the most, by far, I think it's actually the strangest story in the entire Pentateuch. There's nothing like it. You know, even later, I can't think of anything like this either. It almost sounds magical and superstitious, or it's very hard to understand what in the world makes the Torah suddenly speak in this type of language. So let's just recount it quickly. That they're stopping in the inn, and when they were at their lodgings on the way in this inn, God confronted Moses and sought to put him to death. Out of nowhere. We're talking about chapter 4, verse 24. And then there was this angel. And this angel is very, very strange. What does this even mean? It says, Tzipporah took a sharp stone and cut off her son's foreskin and threw it down at Moses' feet. She said about the baby, "You almost caused my bridegroom's bloodshed." And whatever it was released Moses, And Tzipporah said, "My bridegroom's bloodshed by circumcision. Very strange event. Rashi explains it, and I'll read it now with how we would read it with Rashi's explanation interjected into the text. Instead, when they were at their, since God had not waited, so Moses prepared to go, but Zipporah had just given birth to their second son Eliezer. Moses knew that if he circumcised his son before they left, they would have to wait to set out until the baby healed. However, since God had not waited for this, but had told him to go, he understood that he should not delay following God's command and postpone the circumcision so he could set out immediately. But when they were at their lodgings on the way, closer to their destination, the danger to the infant was not so great. There's a law that we sort of learned that you can't do a circumcision when you're on the way. It's not good for the baby. So you have to be in a place for at least 3 days in order for it to be safe. And it's a big question whether Moses knew this or didn't know it, but that's what Rashi seems to be saying, that they knew that the baby needed some peace and quiet in order to recover from the circumcision, and they were on the way, so they didn't do it. But when they were at their lodgings, and they could have stayed there perhaps for enough time, and they didn't do it, Moses could have safely circumcised him, but instead of circumcising him immediately, he arranged their lodgings first. Although this was a slight oversight, it indicated that Moses did not absorb the full gravity of obeying God's will, and was therefore unfit to serve as a people's leader and example. This is, again, if you add Rashi into the text, this is what you get. God therefore confronted Moses and sought to put him to death, because he had abrogated his mission in life, and thus forfeited his right to live. He sent an angel, now this is where it gets really strange, in the form of a snake, and this angel swallowed him from his head to his thigh, spit him out, and then swallowed him again from his feet to his thigh. Witnessing this, Zipporah, his wife, understood why God's angel was about to kill her husband. So Zipporah quickly took a sharp stone and cut off her son's foreskin herself, and threw it down at Moses' feet. She said to the baby, "You almost caused my bridegroom's bloodshed." Seeing Zipporah's alacrity, God was assured that her positive influence would correct Moses' negligent attitude. The angel then released Moses, and Zipporah said, "My bridegroom's bloodshed was almost occasioned by circumcision." So again, when you add Rashi in, it gets just even weirder. Very hard to understand exactly what this is. So we don't have enough time to explain everything, but the first thing we want to notice is this is happening in the sixth reading. And we already talked this year about the fact that the readings follow the order of the Sfirot. So the sixth is related to foundation, to Yesod, which is the Sphira of the covenant. I don't know if you remember in Parashat Vayera, about 2 months ago, we also saw that the first time that God commands anyone to circumcise, commands Abraham, also began in the sixth reading. It continues on into the seventh reading there, but it starts in the sixth reading. So circumcision is always, the covenant of circumcision is always related to the sixth, to the foundation, to the sixth sphera of the emotional attributes. Now, what is going on here? We've talked about this in the past, that even when you have a great mission, it doesn't free you from the commandments. And this was the commandment they had. We have to understand, it sounds like a slight oversight, like he wrote here, but I don't think it's a slight oversight at all, because you have to remember that back then, this was the commandment the Jews had. There was nothing else. It wasn't like officially there was anything else. This was what they had to connect them with God. So if you don't do this, you're not doing anything. So it's not so simple just to say that it was a slight oversight. I don't entirely agree with that interpretation. I think that it's a major oversight. But there's another explanation. Rashi goes in the direction that this was Eliezer, the second child. But there's another explanation, which I think is in many ways deeper and stronger, that it wasn't about the second child, it was about Gershom, his first child. And one might ask, how could Gershom not be circumcised? He must have been at least 9 months older than his brother. They had plenty of time to circumcise him in Midian. So how could it be that it was Gershom that was the problem, and Eliezer was already circumcised? The answer is very surprising. Moses had to make a deal with Jethro in order to wed his daughter Tzipporah. What was the deal? This was the accepted deal everywhere at that time. And we encountered this when we talked about Esau and Jacob. That the firstborn is the one that carries the sacrificial duties of the family. The firstborn was the one who was the priest. This was the ancient tradition until at Mount Sinai God switched it, and he took the sacrificial duties from the firstborn of Israel and he gave it to Aaron and his children, creating a priesthood. But there wasn't a priesthood until then. The priesthood was a family-oriented priesthood, and the firstborn was the one who was designated to be the priest of the entire family. He was the one who did the sacraments. He was the one who did the rites, the rituals, everything that had to do with that. When Moses had his firstborn, Gershom, his deal with Jethro was still an idol worshiper at the time. His deal with him, according to many sources, is that his son would be dedicated to priesthood. Which priesthood? Not a priest of God as we understand him, because Moses doesn't yet have the usual conception of monotheism. He's been raised in a very polytheistic environment. He's the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He knew something about his own, but he wasn't there yet. And it was only at after many years of meditating and being in the desert, and then having the experience of the burning bush, that he came to the full realization of monotheism and God is one. And actually, some sources say that this was Gershom, his firstborn, who was consecrated to be a priest of the same things that Jethro worshipped. And so he was not circumcised. He was not circumcised because it was simply not proper for him to be a circumcised child and to serve these idols, however they were. There is actually, and this is really a very deep topic, later on, about 400 years later, not 400, more like 200 years later, another descendant of Moses, whose name is Menashe, they call him, although they say there that he's a Levite, and Menashe is not really his name, and the sages say that the word was Moshe, but they didn't want to write Menashe. There's a Levite who serves an idol that came with them out of Egypt. And in our trip last summer here with some of our friends in Los Angeles, we got a chance to go by these places in the land of Israel where they were, the place called Giva, and that was the place where they had a temple for this idol, apparently some kind of idol, and one of Moses' descendants was the priest there, and he was serving what it was before this idol. Now that's the normal story. We don't have a lot of time. I just want to abstract it a little bit and save it a little bit. The real story, as it's explained in Chassidus, the way to understand this is that it wasn't an actual idol. And here too, it wasn't Moses seeking some kind of a deal with Jethro that would really lead his child into idolatry. Rather, these forms of idolatry are much lighter, and they're what we call psychological idolatry. And that's the way that Chassidus sublimates this whole story. And it says that really these forms of idolatry are like the way that a person worships his own abilities. That a person feels that everything that's going on in the world is entirely 100% dependent on him and his prowess and his abilities, and that it's not dependent on anything else. That is a form of idolatry. Why? Because there has to be an overriding feeling that everything in the end is decreed by God, and yet there is free will to act. And that very complex and difficult paradox was one that was not clear yet. And so, what did the angel really do? The angel that looked like a snake. It was showing them that from above and from below is two different things. Meaning you can't do both at the same time. You're either swallowed from above by God, and then your bottom is free, and then you feel that God is above, but I still have to walk. Or you say, everything that's happening here is from God, everything that's actually happening, and my job is to take it the right way. My job is to respond to it. My head is free. But it's a paradox that you have to feel from both directions, that it's either half God and half me, or half me and half God. And the very interesting thing is that later, when we when the Torah discusses Moses standing before God, it calls him Moses, the husband of God, or the man of God. It's a way of understanding it. And the explanation that the sages give is from the top of his head till half his body, he is godly, and from the half of his body and down, he is human. More than that being a description of Moses, that's a description of what we need to be like, what we need to strive to be like. That we have to have our head in the clouds and our feet on the ground. Heads in the cloud means that I have a clear indication, a clear understanding that in the end this is God's world. I'm only the cursor, I'm only where things happen, I'm the feet that move around. The feet need to be free, they need to act, they have to be strong, they have to stand strong, they have to be steadfast, and so on. But in the end, the head has to be connected to God completely. And this is a lot of what happened here. We don't have time to discuss it more, but I hope this is a taste of this very interesting story and how to try to begin to take it apart. So I wish everyone Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos, and I hope that everybody has a Farbrengen tonight in honor of the Alter Rebbe, and sings his special nigun, the four babot, or the four parts. If you've never heard it, I will. Now that we're stopping, I'll put a link in the chat.